Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Philip K. Howard, chairman of Common Good. Philip, thank you so much for joining me.
Great being with you, Brittany.
It is great to have you. An exciting conversation today. 1 week after winning the election, President-elect Donald Trump announced that the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who ran against him for president, will co-lead the Department of Government Efficiency. And there have been mixed reviews to this announcement, but you penned an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal entitled this, Elon and Vivek Can Make Government Work Again. So simply put, how can they make government work again?
By focusing on the operating systems of government, not going around and slashing and burning, but getting rid of these ridiculous red tape processes that do no good for anybody. It's just paper pushing. But you have to change the process in order to then slim down government.
How do they change the process, especially as outsiders? Because let's look at their biographies just a little bit. Elon Musk co-founded several revolutionary companies like Tesla and SpaceX. He now owns X, which was formerly known as Twitter. Vivek Ramaswamy is a biotech founder. He also is a former Republican presidential candidate. Are Musk and Ramaswamy the right people here?
Well, I think Musk's instincts are certainly right. I mean, he's a very practical guy. If you read how he runs his companies, he's like a sort of modern day Thomas Edison, rolls up his sleeves. And that's a lot of what government needs. It needs a kind of can-do attitude. But that requires moving from a kind of a compliance-based red tape model of government, which we've had for, say, 50 years, to a human responsibility model of government that allows, for example, procurement officers in the Department of Defense to actually negotiate contracts with vendors that they trust instead of going through this hyper-neutral, years-long, spec everything in advance contracts that no business leader would ever do because it takes too long and you can't ever anticipate all the different issues of a complicated contract. You have to have a relationship where you work things out and be practical. So it involves changing the underlying operating systems of government.
How do you change these underlying operating systems? Because you said in your piece that this idea isn't radical, but something that is synonymous almost is red tape and government. So how do you do this in a way that isn't radical?
Well, some things you can do by executive order. So, for example, I've argued that terminating public employees who everybody knows aren't doing the job is something that the president has a constitutional right to do, and he can simply do that. And I've also argued that you can renounce the collective bargaining obligation imposed on the president by Congress, because who's Congress to tell the president how to fulfill his constitutional responsibility? So there are certain things that you can do by executive order. There are other things that actually require moving from a kind of a legislated complex model to a simpler model. And the way you do that, which I think neither Musk nor Ramaswamy have experience with, is the only way you get law changed is by bringing public opinion along with you. You can't do it by diktats from the White House. It's just not how democracy works. That's the reason FDR had fireside chats. You've got to bring the public along with you, not simply say, I'm in charge now and I'm going to do all this. It just doesn't work that way.
So then, let's say in an ideal world, because you think this is going to work, or you think it has the potential to work here. Right. So day one of the Department of Government of Efficiency, what does that look like? What would you want to see happen to make sure this is as seamless as possible?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is I would let's take the Defense Department as an example. You want the Defense Department to be better able to procure the weapons and the IT systems and the artificial intelligence system that it needs now, not years from now. So I would find a couple of insiders in defense who really know how the game works, and I would come up with a model for how to do it quickly, And if it requires legislative change, I would go to the relevant congressional committee and I would say, here's what we want to do as a pilot project. Give us authority just to do this here now. And let's see if it works. And then so it's not a big change overnight of the whole Defense Department, and then make it work. And I do something similar in the Education Department.
Elon Musk said in October that he can see at least $2 trillion in cuts from the federal government's over $6 trillion budget. Where would you like to see those cuts? Because you said they shouldn't go in there and slash everything, but $2 trillion out of $6 trillion, that's a big fraction of that budget.
Right. That's not really possible. I mean, the federal budget, 80% of it or more are not even authorized by Congress. They're just, Social Security payments and Medicare and Medicaid payments and such. So these are non-discretionary items. You can't simply cut those. But there is a lot of fat, and there's an incredible amount of waste just from the fact that government is run like this big rusty machine, right? That's this 100 years old and just churns out scrap. So changing the operating systems can change a lot, can save a lot of money, but it won't be $2 trillion. Maybe you can get to $1 trillion.
I'm curious, where would you want to see the slashes? Where would you want to see those cuts? What do you think? What's the fat that needs to be trimmed from the federal budget?
The biggest problem with the federal government is that it's ineffective. You can't get a permit for new infrastructure. You can't buy weaponry in a sensible and timely way. That's a much bigger problem than the cost of government. If you make government employees, let's pick a number, 25% more efficient, that's $500 billion. Because that's how much so the federal employees cost roughly $2 to $2.5 trillion. That's their salary and pensions. They're not very effective. To make them more effective by 25% would save 25% of that.
Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter, changed it to X, he cut a lot of jobs at that company. So I'm assuming that if you work in the federal government right now, you might be a little nervous seeing him coming in there and being in the soon-to-be president's ear. So how do you think that they inspire government that isn't just made up of yes men and a fear-based atmosphere?
Yeah, really good point. So what I argue in this column I have in the Wall Street Journal is that the most important thing is not to make officials, civil servants feel fearful, but actually make them feel protected. Because the real problem there are two real problems the two biggest problems with civil service are, one, if you really make a decision and take responsibility, there's always somebody who doesn't like it that's going to attack you. So the people in charge, let's say Musk or Trump, they have to have their back. They have to have a mechanism to protect civil servants who do the right thing from being attacked by the interest group that didn't get the contract or whatever it is, right? The second thing is the senior civil servants who Trump wants to be able to fire at will under a proposal he has. They don't actually have the authority to manage the people below them. So what's really important is to give the senior civil servants the authority to actually manage their own departments. That's a far bigger problem than the civil servants who are simply just dragging their heels and trying not to do what Trump wants, which is also a problem. But the big problem is that government's unmanageable. Well, what's the waste in an organization that you can't manage? It's huge.
So I guess my next question would be, if the government's unmanageable, do you think these two in this department can make it manageable? And what does that timeline look like?
They can make it manageable if they bring in the people who know how each department works and come up with simpler operating frameworks that allow humans to take responsibility. That's not possible today. And so, yes, they could do it. They can do it with help. They can't do it unilaterally. And they're going to have to do it generally department by department, and probably starting with pilot projects. And that timeline is not, well, I mean, you could certainly do a lot in a year, but you couldn't overhaul the entire government in a year. It's going to take a number of years. And eventually it will take the cooperation of Congress and others. But I think when people see how much better government works when you let people come to work and actually roll up their sleeves and take responsibility, then I mean, the public will be much more prone to let this happen. I mean, people are just so sick to death of a government that costs a lot and achieves little.
Musk and Ramaswamy will be advising from their roles outside of the government. So does that concern you? Or do you think, hey, this is a good idea to have fresh eyes that aren't in the government, aren't tied down to working in this administration?
Yeah, I think the conflict of interest and laws and all that are way over the top. They drive good people away from government. We need more people in business to get involved in helping with government. You can check their bank accounts. If they're giving themselves a contract, we'll know it within 24 hours, right? So the most important thing for avoiding corruption or self-interest is transparency. And so, no, I'm not nervous at all about them doing it. I think we should dramatically change government to encourage more leading businessmen and leading citizens.
The conflict of interest question has obviously come up because Elon Musk in particular has billions of dollars of federal contracts and his companies are under multiple federal investigations. So how does he create this transparency for himself and his businesses and his bottom line?
Well, the changes that will be made will be transparent. Musk should not make decisions which directly benefit his companies. I mean, that's sort of conflicts of interest 101, right? So he shouldn't be involved in making a rule that gives him more contracts. Somebody else should decide that. And hopefully he'll be smart enough to realize that. But ultimately, getting citizens involved and people involved are always involved. There's always an interest somewhere. And the question is, can you have enough transparency that you can judge the decisions on their merits? You want to avoid direct conflicts of interest. And beyond that, I think what you want is transparency.
So you think these two can make government work again. When do you think we will see government working again? What will be the signs of a government running more smoothly? What does that look like?
It looks like making quick decisions on artificial intelligence in the Defense Department. It means expediting the creation of new shipyards for the Navy. It means changing the rules in education so that school districts don't give the money if the schools aren't manageable. It means there's just so many improvements that can be made in every department because nobody's talked about the operating structures of government. The parties argue about policy. They argue about immigration policy or whatever. Nobody in our lifetime has argued about the operating structures. And so here you have this big rusty machine that doesn't work. And it needs not to be oiled and greased, but to be replaced. It means replaced by something that uses modern technology and actually lets humans take responsibility. By the way, democracy, just not to make a fine point on it, is about electing people who appoint people who take responsibility and either do a good job or a bad job, but they are accountable for that. Instead, we have a system where nobody's in charge.
That's a really interesting point. So I guess my last question would be, because obviously this has made major news, major waves, Elon Musk having the president's ear in this way, what do you think then is missing from the national conversation when it comes to this new department?
Oh, I think we just need to move from a kind of slash and burn vocabulary. We're going to show those bureaucrats now to one which says, how can we inspire good people to come into government and to stay in government? And how can we have rules that'll give people the pride of taking responsibility and making a difference for their country? We need to completely flip the narrative. So that's something that I'm trying to influence, and I've got some others who I'm working with to try to do that too. But I think if they take that approach, this is change that could be in the history books.
Do you think that because Donald Trump, his message for the past almost decade has been drain the swamp, do you think with this department that's effectively what they're doing? Because you're saying you don't want to slash and burn, you want an overhaul that is effective. Do you think this is essentially what he would describe as draining the swamp?
Well, I think that most people's instincts, and I think President Trump's is the same, is that there are some bad people there and we need to get rid of them, and they're all part of an insider's game. I agree that they're all part of an insider's game. All of Washington is an insider's game. I mean, it's no different than the court of Louis XVI or the pharaohs with the eunuchs around them. Everybody sees the way the system works as a state of nature. They can't imagine it working another way. That's why somebody like Musk and Ramaswamy are really important, because they can't imagine it looking another way. But we have to steer them in a direction that's positive towards the pride of public service, not sort of getting rid of a lot of villains.
Well, really interesting piece. And Philip, I hope you come back on and join me as this department makes decisions. I hope you can break them down with me. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Great to be with you, Brittany.